Hey everyone, welcome back to Dungeon Brew. We are continuing our series on running a thieves guild, and today we're talking about the master thief and the many jobs that he handles. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Dungeon Brew.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Dungeon Brew. We are talking about the master thief as well as the jobs that he handles: burglary, larceny, and pickpocketing, and how those jobs help to support the guild, and how players can get involved in those jobs, and some of the different ways that you can keep those jobs interesting as you build out your thieves guild for your players to play through. Joshua, you want to get us started?
Yeah, it's so funny to me that we're like on video 400 in this series, and we're just now talking about the Master Thief.
I know, right?
But the Master Thief is a crucial element to any thieves guild, and I think a lot of times he gets blended over into other identities that don't necessarily fit him. So we're going to try to I want to say cut the butter, but that's probably not the right terminology.
It doesn't sound like anything I've heard before.
We want to divide hairs here and kind of really give him his own identity and let you know who this guy is. And the Master Thief, like you said, he's doing essentially stealing. He's doing thieving jobs where he's going and taking stuff. But what the Master Thief is not doing is getting engaged into physical confrontations.
Right.
He is trying to steal and take things from others without being noticed. Essentially, he wants his targets to think they've misplaced something, or something's just gone up missing most of the time, where he's just kind of finding particular items of value or individuals to case and taking things from them and then getting out of Dodge. Just getting out of there so you never knew he was there to begin with.
Yeah, and I think that that's a good point, because so we talked about the Master Enforcer, right, in a previous video where we talked about robberies, and that's an important distinction, because we're going to be talking about burglary and larceny in this one, and these are not the same thing. So we're operating off of modern standards of what these things are, because that's the best point of reference that we can have. But robberies are essentially violent crimes. They involve a person. They involve violence or the threat of violence in some way. Burglary and larceny do not rise to that. They generally do not involve an individual, and the Master Thief, like you said, his goal is not to be noticed. But I think that the really interesting thing about thievery jobs for the Master Thief are that these are kind of like passive income type things. There's not a whole lot of expense. There's not a whole lot of interaction. If you have decent thieves who can just walk around the city pickpocketing, or they're very good at casing locations in order to enter and steal items, and that can be money, which is just like money in the pocket, right? That's easy. But it's also the process of going and stealing stuff that could potentially be used for the master fencer, and then you're selling stuff and getting income in that way. But the point is that this is one of those roles that just allows for income to kind of roll in without necessarily having a whole lot of expenses associated with it, outside of the needed training to be able to do it well.
Yeah, there's not a lot of upfront costs. I mean, yeah, you're going to have the training that goes in. Maybe they need some specific tools like a glass cutter or something to get into the area that they're going into. But you're right. There's not a lot of. It's not like I have to buy a bunch of supplies that I then have to off somewhere else. It's not like I'm having to, buy specific poisons, all these types of things. That's just not involved. In fact, the thief themselves may have some tools to defend themselves if things get ugly, but they're not really equipped for full-on combat to go down, because they're not expecting to be caught. They're not expecting to even be seen.
Exactly. So let's start with the first job. Let's start with burglaries, all right?
Yeah, so burglaries, great reference. Home Alone, 1, 2, 3. Yeah. That's essentially what it is.
No, actually, those are very good points.
I know they are.
Because Home Alone, they were burglars. They were entering a residence. That's what burglary is. That's our definition for what a burglary is.
I know. They spend some time casing the house. You see them
Right.
in their van. They're checking it out. They're seeing if people are home, when the times are they come in and out. They know when the lights go off at every house around the area for their Christmas lights. Like they are aware of what's happening in their environment step by step to find the best time frame to get into the house and know exactly what it is that they're wanting to take.
And
Christmas presents.
And it turned from a burglary to a robbery when there was somebody in the house that they threatened with violence. That is the difference between the two. Anyway.
Which, if you remember, Marv was totally against. He's like, we don't do this. We don't do people. We just take things. Like, we're just burglars. We're not...
You have their names? No, I don't know their names.
Man, we watched it like every Christmas for 20 years.
I know Joe Pesci and the tall guy. All right. Anyway, so but that's what a burglary is, and this is one of those jobs that players can do or thieves can do in the guild that you can keep interesting just by having different. It becomes a puzzle basically. Go find a location, which this could start really early in the process. You find a person who looks like they might have some money. You follow that person back to their home. And then you case the home to figure out when that person is there, when they come, when they go, and basically just kind of get a lay of the land and see what's going to be needed to get inside of the house in order to be able to steal their valuables. It's possible that they may even do a soft entry at some point to case the inside of the house, and so go, oh, there's this safe in here, there's this locked room, there's this, there's that, to figure out what is necessary to go in and steal everything that they want in one go without getting caught. So there can be a multi-step process in going through this, and it gets really fun when you get into higher level burglary, just along the lines of going, we're going to sneak into the wizard's tower and try and steal all of his goods, and then you can get into funhouse dungeon type stuff where they're trying to navigate the various traps and obstacles that a wizard places in their tower.
Yeah, I try not to use like modern movie references because so many go through my mind of where they utilize the same type of skill, but oftentimes you'll see that they will gain entrance in some way to the residence just to scope it out like you're talking about. Are there guard dogs? Are there traps that set into place? How many obstacles do I have to go through? How many doorways am I going to be passing through? Do I need to have other members of my team to be part of the process to make sure that we're successful in getting in and getting out without being noticed? When does the town guard walk by or make routes down, this particular area of the neighborhood? So oftentimes there will be a number of previous encounters or quests or engagements that you have that don't involve actually taking anything because you want as much detail about your target before you actually engage in the actual crime.
Exactly. And I mean, you're talking about movie references. I mean, the Ocean's movies are fine for this type of thing. You can plan full heists for your party to go through that you can keep entertaining. And it can be a lot of avoiding encounters, avoiding confrontation, avoiding violence, because that's not the goal. The goal is to make it in and out without being noticed and without being seen. And you can kind of have that same Ocean style thing where you give them options, and or even Grand Theft Auto. It's like, we're going in, this is the job that we're going to do. We're going to do these things. So, except Grand Theft Auto, obviously there's a lot of violence in there, but the idea is basically give them options. Go, okay, which I've done this for you guys before. When you guys robbed the casino in one of our campaign game, or one of the games that I ran, where it was like, are you guys going to try and enter through the front entrance? Are you guys going to try and sneak through the sewers and cut into the vault from below? How are you intending to transport the loot out of there? Because it's heavy, because we're talking about gold and silver and things like that. Like, there were a bunch of factors that you guys had to figure out how you wanted to actually handle those, and then do the preparation in advance so that you could go and do the job.
And we did not do well.
No. Well, you made out with a lot of money, but you did attract the attention of the guards eventually, because you were loud. But the point is that that's the setup for this type of thing. You can go very minor. You can start real simple, because a low-level thief is going to go in and say, okay, this is the house. These are the hours they're there. What time are you going to come back? And then just have a couple of simple skill checks. That's not a big deal. That's a great entry point to figuring out how this works. And I just see it as one of those things that continuously gets more and more and more complicated.
Yeah, so you can scale this at any level, from low-end jobs to higher-end jobs, and you can keep increasing the security and the DCs for your players as you're going through to make sure that it's staying challenging up to their level.
Right.
The other thing as well that the Master Thief is in charge of, that I kind of envision, is the pickpocketing jobs that occur as well. Maybe you have an Oliver Twist scenario where he has a bunch of like kids that are essentially pickpockets that are bringing in money and accomplishing things. And so you may set up unique jobs with your players to essentially go round up the pickpocketing, like loot that has been obtained through the various different sources around the city, having to track down the kids, check them, make sure that they're actually turning everything over that they actually took, and delivering that back to the guild as well.
Yeah, and this is kind of like the burglary job on a smaller scale, I think, too. It's still kind of the same idea of find a mark, observe the mark, determine where they're keeping their valuables on their person, what are their habits, when is a good time to get them, basically when is a good time to try and take what's theirs or pick at their pockets when they're not paying attention. And this is the kind of thing that a good GM is going to have set up just in instances of, oh, he's bored, so it's not a good time because he's just kind of like not doing anything. He's not distracted. He's gone and he's speaking with this pretty girl. He's definitely not paying attention to you now. Now's a good time to strike. And this comes down to insight or sense motive. I don't remember what edition it is anymore. It comes down to those roles. It has to do with perception in order to be able to locate the goods on them. And then identifying a good mark for it anyway, just in the sense of, is this person, or does this person have valuables on them worth stealing? And the complicated versions of this are, I want to go steal from a noble who's walking down this, or who's in a palanquin, being carried down the street surrounded by guards, and you get into the more complicated versions of how do you manage to get close enough to that person in order to be able to pickpocket them, basically. And that's kind of like the heist scenario where the pickpocket becomes a very convoluted and difficult thing, particularly when you're getting hired to steal specific things from specific people. So one noble wants this other noble's trinket of some kind, and how are you going to be able to get that? Are you going to try and get into their house in order to steal it from them, or are you going to try and pick their pocket when they're walking down the street and you're in the palanquin scenario?
So a couple of fun, just quick scenario ideas for this for any GMs that are interested. Let's say that you have a banker that you're trying to get a particular item out of his pocket that you know that he always carries on his person. You may essentially stake him out for a couple of days, recognize his routine, how he walks to work. You see that he always stops and talks to the pretty girl, get himself a sweet roll on his way to work, and that's always an area where he's more distracted than other times. Maybe you also received information that he's scared of rats. So you could potentially try to bump into him while he's talking to the girl at the stand to get his sweet roll and pickpocket it then when he's already engaged in conversation and distracted. Or maybe you have somebody else in the guild release a series of rats around a corner, and when he goes to run, you bump into him on the way as he's trying to get away from the rats, and you take it from him at that engagement. So it's learning information about your target and then setting up a situation that allows you to get the item that you're seeking.
Right, which the bump and grab is a really good pickpocket scenario. Anyway, that doesn't involve violence necessarily. It's basically exactly what you're talking about, where you're trying to, and that's the kind of scenario where you go from a pickpocket specifically to something like a deception. So you're going in and trying to fake your way through accidentally running into someone in order to give yourself a bonus on the pickpocket check on the other end of it. So, but I think that there's probably a variety of scenarios like that people who actually steal stuff would probably have a better idea than we do. But I think getting creative with the various ways that you can do this, and the distraction is a good one too, which I envision is probably necessary for approaching someone like a noble in their palanquin to try and pickpocket them there. How do you distract the guards? How do you bluff your way through or use disguises to get yourself close enough to the palanquin to where you're not going to be accosted or beaten? How are you going to be able to distract the noble enough to be able to gain access to the inside of the palanquin without them, immediately calling the guards over? Like I said, there's a variety of scenarios that kind of gets you to a place where that can become a very involved process just for that.
And that's the message of the day. As a master thief, your primary goal is not to get beaten or accosted.
So, real quick, we haven't actually talked about larceny yet. And larceny, I think, is one of those things where it's basically just taking something that doesn't belong to you.
Just like you thieves, always taking things that don't belong to you.
Or removing something. It is the process of theft. It is stealing. So burglary technically is just unlawful entry into a location. Larceny would be the taking of the items there. But you can have larceny without burglary if you were invited in. So that's the type of scenario where larcenies can be fun, because then you start getting social encounters, and I think that that's a very fun thing for the thief, because the thief is not always hiding in shadows. Sometimes the thief is hiding in plain sight. So I'm going to attend this soiree that I have been invited to, and I enter into it, and I hide by making stealth charisma checks and blending in with the crowd, and no one notices that I'm there, and I'm making my move by stealing priceless artifacts on display that nobody happens to notice, because I'm so good at either sleight of hand checks in order to be able to remove things that are clearly in view, or I'm very good at just hiding in plain sight and no one notices that I'm walking around and doing things. In these instances, he is committing larceny. He is not necessarily completing burglary, at least as far as we're concerned with the definition. There probably is a lawyer somewhere who will shoot a ton of holes in this, but this is just a.
But
different
we're not
way.
criminals or lawyers.
We're not criminals or lawyers, but this is just kind of what I would do as a DM, going in and trying to make a larceny job interesting, and it creates some. It creates some a foil, just in terms of like, how are you approaching this? What is your method? What is your modus operandi? That type of thing.
Yeah. My vision, which I know is another movie reference, but it's hilarious, is Bowfinger when Steve Martin goes walking into the jacket store and he's wearing a really crappy old jacket, and he swaps it out with a really nice new jacket on the hanger, and then you see him like staring at his old shitty jacket and puts it back up there like, I'm not gonna buy that, and walks out with the brand new jacket.
Yes.
Like, it's just like meandering around in regular public and just like, you know, I'm picking this up off the back of the chair, and I'm swiping this, and I'm drinking that cocktail, and I'm doing whatever I'm doing, as though I totally belong, and what I'm doing is perfectly natural, and it doesn't raise the suspicions of anybody around you, even though you are robbing them.
Yes. And I think in terms of movie references for that type of thing, there's probably an incredible number of those that any viewers can probably remember with more accuracy than I can, because when you describe the scene, I remember it, but I couldn't have told you the movie. But yeah, larceny I think are fun, and they also are one of those that, like you said, it can be something very minor. Going in and stealing a pair of boots from the counter or whatever, like going, oh, you know, let me try this on or whatever, and then you make off with the boots. It can also be the very complicated, you know, we're heist level thing where we're trying to enter into this noble soiree, and we have to put all these distractions in place so that we can try and steal the priceless artifacts that are being displayed around the room, etc., etc. And you start to create levels within those quests to make them interesting, engaging. You give everybody in the party a role that they need to fill, and basically go through the process of making sure that the entire thing is, you know, it's multiple sessions leading up to a session where the final heist takes place. And using heist broadly for the pickpocket job, the larceny job, or the burglary job, any one of those can kind of rise to that.
All right. Well, that's all I have, John. Anything else that you have?
No, I think that that's it.
All right. So thank you guys so much for hanging out with us again here on Dungeon Brew. Make sure you hit the subscribe button, and we'll see you next week.
Dungeon